Hey everyone, I'm KotaeKyle. Everyone just calls me Kyle, and I'm a UNI player from San Diego, California. We need to talk. Even if you're new to Uni, it's very likely that you understand how valuable the grid cycle is, but not everyone seems to know what causes it to swing. It leads to a lot of lost grid cycles that were originally nearly impossible to lose. So for today's video, I'll be talking to you about every way grid can swing instantly. Before I start, I'd like to mention that the options I'll be getting into detail about are only the universal ways that give instant grid. It's nice to know that moving forward, such as walking, dashing, air teching forward, and attacks that move you forward cause you to have a positive net grid gain, but they generate grid at a rate rather than giving you a set amount of grid immediately. Additionally, I won't be mentioning any character-specific moves that steal or gain grid since those aren't universal methods to swing the cycle. In case this video is too long for you and you need a quick cheat sheet, I made a chart that lists everything I discussed in this video. Feel free to screenshot this image for you to look back on later or share with your other fellow Uni players. The first way that swings a cycle is pretty obvious, and that's getting hit. Getting hit causes you to lose one block of grid. But me personally, just don't get hit. Jokes aside, I do recommend reconsidering if attacking is what you should really be doing when you're ahead in grid blocks as the cycle is ending. It's okay to keep blocking to guarantee the cycle. If you start mindlessly throwing out moves around the end of the cycle, you risk getting hit and losing both your health and the grid cycle. If you just allow yourself to block and stall for the cycle, it means your opponent will have to respect the threat of your CS when you're playing defense or they'll get hit. The next way the cycle can swing is by blocking overheads. You get a quarter of a block for blocking overheads done from normal jumps, and you get half a block for blocking overheads done from assaults. But if your opponent does a delayed attack from an assault, you only get a quarter of a block instead. Now let's talk about movement. You gain half a block for using an assault. If your opponent isn't hit stun or knocked down, you won't receive any instant grid for assault. However, you will still receive the grid if your opponent blocks them. When the cycle is ending and the space between you and your opponent doesn't allow you to consider throw nor concentrate as options to contest for the grid cycle, consider assaulting if your opponent shows full intention on blocking. Ideally, the grid cycle will reset right after you assault. But if there's still time on the clock, empty assault is also an option to consider to avoid giving your opponent free grid for blocking overheads. You also lose half a grid block for backdashing and a whole block of grid for waking up with a backwards tech. It's not unusual to see people backdashing often, especially when they have a really good one, but avoid using it too often past the 6 o'clock mark, that way you don't give your opponent a free cycle. Be okay with teching forward or in place when you're ahead in grid blocks. You already lost a block for getting hit, so teching backwards will bring you down a total of 2 blocks now. Additionally, if you're in the corner, waking up backwards puts you in the same spot as if you woke up in place, so you end up losing a grid block for no reason. Next, everyone knows shielding swings the grid cycle. Purple shielding causes the attacker to lose 2 blocks while the defender gets a whole block, but if you're in Warple, you only gain half a block instead. When whiffing green shields, the defender loses 1 block of grid as well as any incomplete blocks. When in a life lead with the cycle ending and your opponent decides to zone with fireballs or beams full screen away, shield and take the free grid. I also recommend getting used to situations and moves that are practically considered free grid donations. Multi-hitting moves like Yuzu's 2C and Gordo's Mortar Slide aren't chain shift cancelable on the first hit, so they're always shieldable without any risk. However, do shield other moves with caution because multi-hitting moves like Tatsu's V-Tatsu are CS cancelable. It's common to see him cancel out of the second hit to call out his opponent's green shield. The new Creeping Edge works similarly to shielding. A successful roll will give you 1 block of grid regardless of Warple and will cause the defender to lose 2 blocks of grid. A failed roll attempt will cause you to lose 2 blocks, so don't go too crazy with this. Shooting then dash blocking full screen projectiles is a fantastic option when you need to approach your opponent, but the distance you cover isn't that much if your opponent keeps throwing projectiles. Using Creeping Edge in this situation is perfect since it will give you the same amount of grid while covering more distance. Now we can move on to throws. Wolfing a throw will cost you 1 grid block. Failing to tech a throw will cost you 2 blocks, and a successful throw tech will give you 2 blocks, as well as remove 2 from your opponent. It's worth noting that the grid swing from a throw doesn't happen until the throw tech window has ended or the throw is teched. Doing a yellow throw will remove 1 block of grid from your opponent at the start of the throw, regardless if it's tech or not. With this in mind, throwing is a great way to regain a grid lead due to the drastic shift in grid swing when done around the 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock mark. It's not impossible to swing the cycle past that time, it just becomes a lot more difficult to swing the cycle back this way due to having to wait for the throw tech window to finish, as well as this being a popular time players like to start option selecting. Up next, force function. Using force function costs 1 block of grid, but if you're in Vorpal, it'll only cost half a block. If you use force function while having less than the required grid cost, not only do you end up with 0 grid, but you also give your opponent a grid block as well. Be careful with using force function when the cycle is about to end, because it could lose you the cycle at the last second. The Smart Steer Ender is an odd one, especially since it's a new mechanic to UNI2. Using the Smart Steer Ender in a combo will have rare results with grid. Super prorated combos will cause the Smart Steer Ender to cost grid, and combos that aren't as prorated will cause it to gain grid. The only exception to this is if at any point in the combo you use the entire 5A auto combo skill, because you'll gain half a block or a full block if you're in Veil off. If the grid cycle hits 11 o'clock while comboing your opponent and you need a tad bit more grid to win the cycle, this is the best time to use the Smart Steer Ender. If you want to know what spots in your BNB are safe to use the Smart Steer Ender for that last second grid gain, you'll have to open up training mode and lab it out. The last 2 ways that swing the cycle are very straightforward. You lose half of your total grid blocks rounded up for getting hit by a Veil off. If you had 6 blocks of grid, you'll end up with 3, and if you had 2 blocks of grid, you'll end up with 1 block. Lastly, whenever the grid cycle resets, the player who won the Vorpal cycle actually gains a block of grid, but if they get Celestial, they end up with a full grid gauge instead. Once again, this is Kyle speaking. Thank you so much for watching. It's a lot of information, but I hope you enjoyed the video and learned how to win more cycles and lose them less often. That is all for every way grid can swing instantly. I hope you look forward to the next video.